Erev Tov, everyone, and welcome. It is Monday night. It is 8 p.m. 8 p.m. here on the east side of the United States, here in the diaspora. This is the House of Seven Beggars. Yeah, the House of Seven Beggars. Therefore, it must be Zayde's Story Corner. That's right. Time for Zayde's Story Corner. Uh, Good to have you all here. Let's see, we have in the chat room Susan and Mary and Kelsey Lynn and Richard. Richard is here? Yes, Richard is here. He does our lead-in music. Yes, he does. He does the lead-in music for your show, among other things that he's done for us. Um, Veronica is with us, Shlomo and Shoshi. Susan and well, we said Susan and okay, so that's what we got so far, and others coming in later. Yeah, always people trailing in later on. So we are continuing and getting very close to the end of the book we've been reading, Classic Hasidic Tales by Meir Levine. And then we go into another book. Yep. Then we will go into another book. But we have, I think we only have the story that we were in the middle of, and then one more story after that. So probably right after or during Hanukkah. Yeah, probably during Hanukkah we will finish this book. We'll see. We got a few pages here to go, but yeah, the last one's the best one. Yeah, the last one is the best one. The last one is, and we'll wait until we finish this one before we let you know what that is. So, in the meantime, we should probably get you on your camera, if you would be so kind. Okay. Let me switch you over, and there you go. Oh, there I am. I am a good-looking lion, don't you think? Okay. So, oh, Marshall has joined us. And Marshall put up a picture of lions earlier. I had to comment. Okay, so we were reading the story The Wind. And if you remember, this was the people that had had all this crazy mishagash going on, and they talked to the master of prayer, and there were 6 other masters, and and he's kind of explaining things now. So we will back up just a little bit and bring everybody up to date as to where we were. They, kind of prompt your memory, And Guy has now joined us. Good to have you, Guy. Okay, so now in the king's court there were 6 ministers. The sage, who was the master of all wisdom and the keeper of the marvelous hand, the counselor, who was the master of words and melodies, the champion, who was a dear friend of the king, and each carried with him the portrait of the other and looked upon it when they were separated. For in each portrait was such a power that a look upon it was to grow love for him that was pictured there. And the 4th minister was the treasurer, in whose keep were the staff of jewels and the cap of precious stones, and all the treasures of the king. The 5th minister was the warrior, and to him the king gave the marvelous sword. And this sword had 3 powers. If it were but raised against the enemy, all the leaders of the enemy fled. But if the army of the enemy tried to do battle without its leaders, one had to but lean the sword sideways, and the enemy fell dead. And if it was leaned to the other side, the enemy withered, and their skins dried and fell from them. And I, the master of prayer, was the king's sixth minister. So now you are caught up, and now we continue on with this story here. To each of us, the king had shown the secret place where we might replenish our innermost power. For the source of each sort of strength was marked upon that wondrous hand. Then each day we would retire, each minister to his place to replenish his innermost power. The sage went one way to the source of wisdom, and the counselor went another way to the source of the world. The treasurer went to the source of riches, the hero to the source of strength, and I, my way to the source of prayer. Okay. One day, the king asked me, "Whom shall I choose as husband for my daughter?" Then I said, "Let her marry the warrior." The king was pleased with my answer, and the daughter and the hero were married. Then a boy child, a bochik, was born to them, who was marvelously beautiful and so wise that before he could speak he understood all things. And this anyone might see, for when a jest was spoken he laughed. But one day, when we had all gone away from the palace, each minister to the source of his power, there came a whirlwind that overturned the world, making desert into where ocean had been, turning the dry land into sea. The wind came into the king's palace, but did not move a feather from its place. It went directly to the room where the princess sat with her babe, snatched the child from the arms of its mother, and fled. The princess went after the wind, seeking her child. And so she ran, and no one knew whither. Then the queen ran after the princess, and lost sight of her, and ran another way, and no one knew whither. And after the queen the king ran, and no one knew whither. When we returned, each man from his own place, we found no one in the palace. Then each man set out another way in search of the king and his kin. The wondrous hand was gone, for the whirlwind had overturned all things, and not one of us could find his way to the place where the source of his power, his way, yet each of the ministers still had in him a power that was more than any other man in the world. Therefore, if this conqueror is the same hero of our kingdom. No one can stand against him. Remember, these were the people who worshiped gold. They worshiped wealth, and they were afraid that this person that was coming, this conqueror, was going to take it all away from them. So we continue. When the gods of the money worshippers heard these words, they would not let the master leave them, for they feared the conqueror. Soon the warrior was 50 miles from the city. Then he sent his messengers to demand that the city surrender. The money worshippers ran to the master and said, "If this is indeed your friend the hero, can you not help us?" The master asked them, "Will not your riches help you?" "He refuses riches," they said. Then the master decided to go to see whether the conqueror was indeed his friend the hero. He went out to the invading army and spoke to one of the warriors. "Who is your leader?" he asked. "And how did he come among you?" "That is a strange story," the warrior replied. "For once there was a whirlwind that upset an entire kingdom and made desert into ocean and the sea into dry land. After the wind had passed, all the people came together, but their king was gone. So they asked, 'How shall we choose a king?' And they asked again, 'What quality is in a king more than any other man?' Some said, 'Honor.' For even the dead, who have no use for food or gold or beautiful garments, still demand honor be paid to their memory. Then they who sought honor in a king formed a band and went off together. On their way they met a caravan of gypsies. An aged man was being carried at the head of the caravan. He was blind and crooked, and his voice was harsh, and he was angry with his bearers. Though he cursed them aloud, his followers honored him, for of all his brothers and sisters, their many descendants, he was the eldest, and therefore the head of their tribe. When the people saw what great homage was paid to the gypsy, they said to him, "Be our king." So he growled and cursed them also, and they went after him and found a land suitable to them, and settled there to serve their king. But another part of the people declared that not honor, but death was the greatest of all things, for all men and beasts, and even the trees, and the fruit upon the trees, ended in death. So they sought a murderer to be their king. You imagine such a thing. They heard a terrifying screaming and asked, "What has happened?" "A man has killed his father and his mother," they were told. "Such a man must be the greatest murderer. they cried, and they made him their king. They sought a land between two mountains where thieves and bandits dwelt. There they lived while the murderer ruled over them. Some said a king should be more delicate than all other people. So they went to seek for a king who did not eat the foods that other people ate. Yet others said, man should multiply on the earth, and because of beauty children are born. So they sought for a beautiful woman to rule over them. Still others said, it is by his power of speech that a man is different from the beasts. So they sought for a marvelous speaker. And in a marketplace they found a madman who talked to himself in 7 languages and never stopped talking. Well, of course not. He had 7 different people to talk to. And he never stopped talking. They made him king. There were still others among us who said that joy is the greatest thing in the world, and they found a drunkard in a dirty shirt. He lay in the road and lifted a bottle of wine to his mouth, and he sang. So they made him their king, and they went to a land where grapevines grew and settled in that land. Oy. Some sought for a wise man to rule over them. And at last there were those who said that strength was the greatest of all things among men. I was of that group. We went until we found a giant who could eat an ox and drink a barrel of ale in a single meal. And him we made our king. Wherever we passed, the people fled before us. But one day there came a hero who did not run from us. Instead, he went among us and drew his sword. When our warriors fled from him, and our carts were tumbled from the highway, and our king turned and ran. So we went up to the hero and said to him, be our king. He became our king and set out to conquer the world. It is not to rule the world that he seeks, but something otherwise. And when a city will not surrender to him, he lifts his sword, and this sword has 3 powers. Then the master knew that the hero was indeed his old friend, and he sent his name to the hero. The hero called for him. He went to the hero's tent, where, with great joy, they recognized each other and cried, at last, we are coming together again. But after a moment, the warrior asked the master, have you found any of our old companions? The master said, I have sought everywhere, and I came upon the place where all of them had passed, but I found none of them. One day I went by a hill, and the hill was covered with green grass. And at the top of the hill there was a golden shrine, as if the sinking sun had come to rest and remained there. I went up the hill and found the king's crown lying there, and the winds moved slowly about the hilltop and murmured a majestic melody. But the king was not there. He had passed, and I could not find him. On another day, I walked across a dreary wasteland where there was no tree, no bush, no blade of grass, and all the earth was parched. Then I saw a tiny drop of blood upon the ground, and then another, and each drop was like a tear. Then I came to a pool of blood, and faintly, as if from the bottom of the pool, I heard the chanting of a dirge. Then I knew that the queen had passed that way and wept tears of blood for the loss of her loved ones. But I could not find her there. I went further. I came to a fair meadow, and in the meadow was a tiny stream that was as white as lamb's wool. And when I came near, I saw that it was a stream of milk, and it made murmuring sounds as it flowed. It sounded like the humming of a lullaby. Then I knew that the princess had passed this way, and I sought for her, but I could not find her. At last I came to a desert, and in the sand were the footprints of a child's naked feet. And as I went, I saw something that glittered like a sun ray in the sand. I stopped and found a golden hair of a child. And all about me, in the still air, there hovered a breath of sound, as of a child singing in the womb. Then I sought for the child, but I could not find him anywhere. And so I passed from the places of all the king's ministers. I passed a sea of wine, where the king's friend had spoken beautiful words. I passed the forest where every bird spoke, and I knew the counselor had been there. And I passed a stone upon which the sage had graven an image of the hand that held the past and the future of the world. I walked upon a heap of pebbles that blazed like a fiery wheel, and I saw the pebbles were jewels, and knew that the king's treasurer had been in that place. And I came to the wilderness, where a lone tree stood, and at the foot of the tree the earth was wounded, as by a stab of a great sword, and from the opening there came a martial song of war. Then I knew that you had passed that way, but I did not find you there. The hero answered, I too passed over those places, and in the desert I gathered 7 hairs of the child, and they have all the colors of the rainbow. So I sat there and took pleasure in looking upon the child's hairs. I remained there for a long time, and I did not eat. But at last I was hungry, and I arose and went, but forgot my staff there. I saw your staff. I knew you had been in that place too, said the master. For there from there I went on until I came to a number of people who made me their king. Then I went out to conquer the world. But it is not because I desire to rule the world, only that I hope to find the princess and our child, and the king and queen, and all our company. Then the master remembered his mission and said, what can we do with the people of this city? They are fallen into terrible error, for they worship only riches. At this, the hero shook his head. I once heard the king declare that men may be rid of any error except the worship of gold, he said. And the only way to rid them of the worship of gold is the way of the sword. Then the master asked the hero, do not attack them at once, but give them yet a while, for they have sent me to you. Because of his friendship for the master, the hero set aside a number of days' respite for the city. Then the two friends arranged signs by which they would send messages to each other, and the master went on his way. And that is where we are going to pause for right now. We are going to take a 6-minute break. And when we return, let's hope we can find out what happened to all those people that the master and everybody is searching for. So everybody stay tuned. We will be back in 6.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
It's intermission time, folks, so hurry, hurry, hurry. Step right over to our refreshment center for the most extravagant array of refreshment goodies ever assembled under one roof. Enjoy breathtaking, mouth-watering goodies, everything from a snack to a delicious full meal. At our refreshment center, you'll find a large variety of goodies to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, or your sweet tooth. So hurry, hurry, hurry. Visit our refreshment center now. The show starts in 5 minutes. show starts in 4 minutes. The show starts in 3 minutes. The show starts in 2 minutes. The show starts in 1 minute. And now, on with the show.
And we are back. Okay, I see Miles has joined us. Good to see you, Miles. Okay, let us get on with our story and find out if they ever find their friends. Eh? Okay. Okay, I found my place. As he went, he saw a number of people on the road. They were carrying many large tomes, and they were wrapped in prayer shawls. And as they went, they sang in praise of heaven. At this, the master was startled, so he began to pray. He stood and prayed, and they stood and prayed. But at last the people said to him, "Who are you?" And he said to them, "Who are you?" Seems to be a reasonable question. Little trouble with the pages there? Yeah, just a little. They answered, "When the whirlwind came over the world, the people divided to seek kings for themselves. We were those who declared that holiness was the greatest of all things, and therefore we seek the master of prayer to be our king." And when they heard him pray, their eyes were opened to all the mysteries, and saw that he was a great man, learned in the Torah, and they said, "Be our king." So the master became their king and went with them. Meanwhile, there's always a meanwhile, isn't there? Meanwhile, the money worshippers returned to their old ways and sacrificed beastmen to their men gods. But no one came against the warrior. The days passed, and the time he had given them was nearly gone. So they decided they would do as they had planned to do at first, and sent for help to the rich land where every man was a god. They chose 7 of their own gods and sent them on their way. But as the emissaries went on the road, they saw a man walking. The staff that he carried was encrusted with jewels so costly that it alone was worth more than any of their gods. And the man wore a cap covered with diamonds that were worth to them all the stars in the heavens. The men gods fell down to his feet and desired to sacrifice themselves to him, but he would not permit them to do so. Instead, he took them up on a hill and showed them the treasures that were there. For he was the king's treasurer. When the money worshippers saw the treasure, they cried, "You are the God of gods." God forbid, eh? And they decided that there was no need for them to go to the country where all men were gods, for surely the God of gods alone could help them. So they said to him, "Will you come to our city and be our King of Kings?" He went with them, and when he came to the city, he would not allow any sacrifices to be made to him. But they told him of the conqueror who threatened the city. He cried, "Perhaps it is the hero whom I knew in olden times." Then the treasurer went out and invited to the invading army and asked to be taken to the hero. When the treasurer and the hero met, they recognized each other and rejoiced. And the hero cried, "The master of prayer has been here too." Then they told each other how they had sought each other, and the treasurer said, "I too passed over a place where our friends had been. Only your place and the place of the master I never found." And at last they remembered to speak of the city of money worshippers. There is only one way to cure them, the hero repeated, and that is the way of the sword. Give them a little more time, the treasurer asked. So the hero gave them more time, and the treasurer returned to the city and spoke again to the people, trying to draw them out of their error. And this time the money worshippers listened, for when the master had spoken against riches, they had thought him mad. But now it was their own God of gods who spoke as the master had spoken. And they thought, perhaps these strangers are not so mad. And they said to him, if our way is wrong, show us a way out of it. Then the treasurer told them of a marvelous sword and said, you must go the way of the sword, and there you will be healed. Again, the richest men of the city were chosen to go with the treasurer in search of the way of this sword. They dressed themselves in their costliest garments, all overhung with gold and silver, and started upon their journey. But first the treasurer went secretly to the hero and said, I am taking them on the journey, but I hope on the way to find the king and all our companions. Let me go with you, said the hero. And he disguised himself so that the rich men might not be frightened of having the warrior amongst them. And then he sent a messenger to the master, telling him of their journey. The master came hastily, saying, let me too go with you. Perhaps we will find the king and all his court. They took him with them, while all the people of the master's land prayed for the success of the journey. So they went, and they came to the borders of a kingdom. A watcher stood on the road. What sort of kingdom is this? They asked him. This is the kingdom of the wise, he said. For when the whirlwind upset the world, we were those who said that the greatest of all things is wisdom, and we sought a sage to rule over us. One knew the way of the stars, another could see into the waters, but at last we found a man who sat upon a stone and studied his own hand. What wisdom have you? We asked of him. And he answered, only the wisdom that is within my soul. So we made him our king. Then the master and the hero, the treasurer, and the 7 rich companions were taken to the hall of wisdom. And the king upon the throne was truly their friend, the sage. There was great joy amongst them, and they spoke of all the others that had not been found, and then they spoke of their journey. We seek a way to rid these men of the folly of money worship, the treasurer said, for I am the king of their kingdom. We are all fallen into folly, the sage replied. Some worship honor, some worship lust, and some worship death itself. And even we who worship wisdom have fallen into unbelief and empty questioning. But of all these follies, men can be healed, except only the folly of gold. Then he too went with them to find the way of the sword. While they said, "Have you no longer that marvelous hand upon which all the ways were shown?" The sage answered, "I have the hand, but I know that its secret is for the king alone to read. And since the king is lost, I do not look upon the thing itself, but I have made an image of the hand which guides me." They came to a land where men stood and spoke with each other. And men came eagerly towards them, saying, "We are the people who sought the master of words for our king. At first we crowned a madman who babbled in many languages. But then we heard a man who stood in the forest. He spoke, and the birds and the stones and the trees heard him and answered. He sang, and they answered his song. So we said to him, 'Be our king,' and now he rules over us." Indeed, this was the king's counselor, and he went with the others. They continued on their journey and came to another kingdom and found a soldier asleep. They awakened him and asked, "Who is your king?" "We had a king whom we found drunk in the road," he said, "but afterwards we came to a man who stood by a sea of wine. We asked him to be our king." The sage knew at once that the sea of wine must have been made by the king's friend. So they came to him and knew him, and he was filled with joy. And where they found the watchman lying with a woman. "This is the land of beauty," he told them, "and our queen is a beautiful woman. But one day in the wilderness we came upon a woman so beautiful that the very trees bowed their fruit to her hand. But her beauty was sorrowful, and she sat very still with her head bowed, and sang a lullaby, while from her breast there flowed a stream of purest milk. Then we begged her, 'Be our queen.' So she rules over us, but no man may approach her, for she awaits her true husband and mourns the loss of her child." They knew that the watchman spoke of the princess, and they hastened to the court. The hero took her in his arms, for he had found his wife, and they rejoiced together. The people of the kingdom desired him to be their king and remain with them. But the hero and the princess said, "We must go and seek our child." They went with the others and came to a kingdom where there were no watchmen. A man stood singing, and they asked him, "Who is your king?" We are those who sought a king more pure than all other men, he told them. And we said, we shall know his purity by the food upon which he lives. At last we came upon a stream of milk, and by the stream there sat a child, and he fed only upon the milk. We made him our king, and our king is a 1-year-old babe. They ran at once to see the child, and they knew him, and he knew them, for he was wondrously wise. Then the mother and their father and the child rejoiced with one another, and the ministers rejoiced, and the rich men were happy, though they did not know for what. But the king and the queen had not yet been found. And all the company went forth on the quest, and they took the child with them. There was a land between two mountains, where watchmen stood in black armor, and would not let them pass. Who is your king? The warrior asked. We are those who chose death as the end of all things. And for our king we took a man who had murdered his mother and father. But afterwards we found a woman who stood by a sea of blood and moaned. And we said, surely she has died more deaths than he. So we killed our king, and we asked the woman to rule over us. They went into the dungeon of death, and then the queen saw them. She cast aside her black veil, all but one heaviest, for my husband has not been found, she said. The queen went with them, and they came to a land that was fair and green. A shepherd stood on the hill, and they asked of him, who is your king? We are of those who chose honor as the greatest of all things. And at first an old gypsy ruled over us. But one day we came to this hill, and upon this hill there was seated an old man. His beard was white, and the wind went softly about his hair. There was a crown upon his head, and his aspect was of such wondrous peace and dignity that a wild fawn came and knelt to him and kissed his hand. We said, be our king and rule over us. Then they came to the top of the hill, and the king was truly their king. And so the holy court was come together again, and there was joy on earth and in heaven. And the rich man saw and wondered. Each minister told the king of the errors of his people, and the king sent the master to bring the peoples out of their strange errors. But there was no one way to help those who worshiped money. At last the hero reminded the king, I once heard the king say that there was only one way to bring men out of the error of riches, and that was the way of the sword. And that is where we are going to stop for tonight. Okay. So, I think maybe next week we will do something a little different. I think we will do some Hanukkah stories, and then we will come back and we will see what happens to the king and his court. So anyway, don't forget, we will on Wednesday is the Torah study with Rabbi A and Reb Ruben, and Friday night is Kabbalat and Ma'ariv, the Shabbat service. And then on Shabbat at 10 a.m. is Shachrit and Musaf. And then on Monday, I will be back and we will tell some more stories. Okay, so I hope you will return to be with us. Until the next time, everyone, Laila Tov.